It's one of the most divine things. It's what differentiates us from animals. It's this gift that God has given us, and we should use that and play by God's rules in order to live in the world. And when, again, fiat money is one example of this, but there's all kinds. If you look at Pol Pot, you look at Stalin, they just suppress all dissent. They don't want to have arguments. They just want to exercise brute force so that, to put it in biblical parlance, their kingdom can come and their will can be done. I think like reason itself is part of God's will being done. And as Christians, we go out there converting the world not at the point of a sword, but we go out with the word. We go out with the word of God. We go out with a logical argument of who Jesus is and what he's done. And we proclaim that this is what happened. And we make these arguments, and we want to present these truths to the consciences and minds of people and then have them respond. It's a tremendous thing that we're losing, we've lost, and that we need to regain.
No, it wasn't really human forever. I don't know if you've seen any of my schizo posting on Twitter over the past week, but there's kind of
I have not.
Stuff. You have not. Okay, that's.
Have you heard of EACC?
EAC.
EAC.
Oh, maybe. What is it?
It's intersecting a lot with what James Prulos was talking about, but it's it's futurism, it's tech optimism, and
yeah.
So Connor's like had a space on Sunday night, and it had like over 1,000 people in it talking about if EAC and Christianity were about the same mission. And it was quite interesting. I had other obligations, but I was able to catch like kind of the tail 20, 30 minutes. And I was like, what is going on here? This conversation is just, it was something different for sure, in a way that I've never heard of Christianity and technology talked about in terms of just futurism and Christianity and tech, and how it all converges into whatever this next iteration is. I was like, whoa, this is next level. And I felt very inferior, which is why I did not request to talk. But Connor, I think you should talk a little bit about that as we're getting going, because it was just riveting.
Yeah, well, maybe we just touched on the news segment. I think we could just like jump into the convo.
Sure.
But maybe check that out, especially if you're interested in James Purlos' thought, because I'm like, oh, actually, this now I understand James a little more now that I understand that space. But.
Yeah, we're trying to. So you referenced the Thank God for Gnostics podcast we did. We're trying to get him on. He agreed to come on the podcast to chat, but then he got this show with the Blaze, and he's like super busy. So I don't know if he's got time for us. But
gotcha. Actually, really, more what I wanted to bring up about it was just this. Because you kind of had an anti-tech podcast talking about James Prulos, and you even said, "Well, I don't even know if we should be going into space," which I thought was.
Oh yeah, this is my
okay. What about Bitcoin? Bitcoin is tech.
Yeah,
a lot of people are scared about Bitcoin. I mean, boomers that I talk to, my parents are like, "What, digital money? I don't know about that. I prefer my HUD." So where are the intersections there? But
man. Well, I mean, we could get right in there if you're interested.
Let's talk about it.
Well, the difference that I would see, again, this is loosely held. Like, this would not be, I'm going to the mat on, space is satanic. But what I would say is, when you look at, this applies to people as well as it does nations and humanity. It's always easy to look over and be like, oh, look, I'm going to go out here, I'm going to solve these problems. And then you look at their own lives and they're a complete disaster, right? Like it's always tempting to like go solve problems over there rather than solve your own issues. And I think this is, and again, we all do this to a certain degree. Like we're all hypocrites to a degree, but like, this would be an example where, Jesus says, to people to the Pharisees who have this tendency, he says, get the beam out of your own eye, so that you can see clearly to deal with your brother's, stuff that he has going on. And so, I just look at it like with the, going to space, you're like, oh, look, great. We're going to go to space. We're going to find out all these things about the universe. The resource expenditure involved in order to develop these programs. I mean, if you think about just the ways in which they could have been used, to help people here on Earth, like I just think there's so much hubris that went into that. Now, again, is there good things that have come out of it? Of course, but like the fact that good can come from it is not an indication that you should have undergone the process, to pursue that in the first place. And so I think, where I would go is, again, I think the reality is that every person, every culture has a telos, like they have like an end to which they exist. They have certain, understandings of reality that function or that form and guide how they live and what they pursue. And so I think, again, asking those questions is something that asking those questions and looking at going to space, for example, through that lens is something that when I look at it, I don't necessarily see the most positive, things going on there. I can see maybe, fear again, like we were competing against the Russians and all these things. And so, can you argue that part of the space race was trying to be self-preservative, trying to, protect ourselves against the Russians? Okay. I don't think that's horrible, but again, I think there's a lot of this, there's a lot of hubris involved and a desire for glory that neglects the things that we could be focusing on. Should be I would argue should be more focusing our attention and resource investment on than maybe something like it's as sexy as going to space.
Progress for the sake of progress, right?
Yeah. Again, progress to what end? Like, what is our goal in these things, and what are the goals and the ends that God has given us to, especially as Christians, to think about and to pursue. So,
I think an aspect of it though does also have to do with especially with Christianity presenting an optimistic view of the future.
Sure.
And I think sometimes we fail to do that as Christians. And that's why I think some of the conversations around the tech optimism space and going to space in general, reaching for the stars is kind of powerful because it imbues this sense of an optimistic outlook for a potential future reality. And I don't think we as Christians want to miss that. And I think that's kind of what I'm scared that we do sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's truth in that. I think at the same time, you have somebody like Elon Musk, the person who's, I wouldn't say he's one of the foremost people pushing, getting off this planet. And he's very much afraid that, we're not going to be able to inhabit this planet. And so he's got this vision of the future that is very pessimistic, in the sense of, this existence on this planet is very pessimistic. And so, I mean, I would argue it's more pessimistic than it is optimistic. I mean, if you're going to describe optimistic because we can save ourselves by getting out of here and moving to another planet like Mars, I just think as a Christian, we are the future of Earth is a lot more optimistic than somebody like Elon, might think.
Sure, but Elon could possibly also be doing it because he just thinks it's cool to do, though. That's the thing.
Sure.
Like Elon does have he has this. How do we say this? He has this moral imperative that he claims to live by, and that's why he's doing the things he does. But there's also an element of this is what he's interested in doing.
100%. And so again, but like I look at that and I'm like, okay, and I mean, how is what he's doing possible? And this is where we could get into a larger conversation about debt. Like he is in fiat money. Like, is it possible? Would it be possible to do what he's doing? Whether you look at Tesla or look at any of these things without, if he was functioning only on private capital, like I don't think so.
No.
Can you do a lot of what he's doing in a hard money world? Like maybe, but it would involve a lot of sacrifices that aren't currently in play. Like right now, again, this fiat money, if you can just create money out of thin air with very little cost, then you can subsidize all kinds of things that are outside of the parameters that would normally govern human interactions in human life. And I think that those parameters and limitations are good gifts from God. They're designed to help us, and they're designed to help foster the world that he made, rather than, see us live in a world where we created according to our own image and likeness, and we pursue ends that, serve to further our own glory rather than his. So that'd be my skepticism on
how much debt can you afford to have, right? That's the name of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting point. I hadn't really thought, about the debt fiat money aspect of it, but I actually like what you say is the solution to that is it would actually require a lot of sacrifice, which is what we talk about a few times in this podcast. Like we shouldn't always be doing things for the ends of money or for capital. We actually should be looking at what we're doing as self-sacrifice and going out and achieving great things for the glory of God, not for monetary gain. So I think that it would be great if we could inspire people to do more of that.
But to bring it back to Elon, I like I personally like the fact that he's going to space. Like I don't, he could be spending all of his capital and, maybe a ton of debt, on accumulating more wealth, but it's almost, and SpaceX has some returns, so they have government contracts and stuff like that. So they are making some money, but I don't know, if the wealthy people in medieval times would sponsor the building of a cathedral, right? And this is a great, not a great structure, but a great act, and maybe a structure on Mars, right? I don't know. I'm personally not like an Elon fanboy, but I'm just.
I like Elon too, and also to your point, when Notre Dame, right, when it burned, you had all these people out here like, well, why should we care about such a old, costly building? Like we don't care about that. And it's like, no, like this is actually, it's a recognition of all the human effort that went into it, but it's also a recognition of all the human effort that went into sacrificing something totally for the glory of God. Sacrificing your labor, your time to build something great to the glory of God. And that's a powerful thing.
Matt, I will say this too. You did mention something really interesting, is how when private business gets too ahead of the progress of government programs, the government always has to figure out how they can contract it and get involved, because the same thing happened with Amazon a few years ago when Amazon came out saying we're going to start doing our own logistic services, and the USPS is like, whoa, you're going to put us out of business here. And so now that's why everybody's packages arrive late from Amazon, is because now the post office gets to do it, because Jeff Bezos was going to basically create a logistics service that was going to be more efficient than the post office, and he had the means to do it. Same with Elon and SpaceX. So that's why it's like, it's unfortunate, but I guess it kind of falls back to the evil fiat system and how it can sometimes impede human progress in different ways. And I guess we can kind of transition into some of this Bitcoin stuff because it's so pertinent to kind of the subject that we're talking about.
Let me just add one more thing, because I think this gets at kind of, again, just kind of gets at the heart of what we're talking about. So, I mean, the similarities, like one of the things that I think is helpful to do as Christians is, all right, we try to filter the things that are going on in real time in our current moment, whatever it is, look through it through the lens of the scriptures. Okay. And so I think, like, when I think about something like Elon, going to Mars, or I think about any one of these number of things, one of the things that comes to mind is the Tower of Babel, right? Like what drove the building of the Tower of Babel? They said, we want to build a tower into the heavens. Like we want to get into the heavens. We want to escape this world, and we want to get up to the heavens. And so they build this building with that goal. And so again, when I look at space exploration, I'm seeing this is a very similar thing going on, similar instinct. And so they're trying to build this building, further, that works to give themselves glory. They can then boast in it and say, look what we've done. We've built this edifice, and it's going to glorify us. This is in contrast to the stated goal, one of the stated goals that God, gives all throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament, is to build a house for his name. He wants to build a house that glorifies his name. And so the way that God does this, ironically, is by building families. And so we see, the Tower of Babel was a building, and in a very real sense, it was a house. But then what does God do? God builds houses through people. So that Abraham has a house. He says to David, I'm going to make an everlasting covenant with your house. And so then we see this on. We go into the New Testament, and you see, God has another building project that he's continuing. He's going to build a temple, but it's not going to be a physical temple the way that it was in the Old Testament. This is where we get into the book of Corinthians, and he says, to the Corinthians, do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not your own? And then all throughout the rest of the New Testament, we see the church being called a temple. And so I think this instinct to pursue building projects is a godly instinct. The question is, how are we going to pursue, and what buildings are we going to build? And so, again, this is not to say that pursuing the construction of something like a cathedral or something like that are inherently wrong. But when you look at the time and the resources and the human cost to doing those things, you think about they think thousands of people killed, if not more, like in the construction of the Great Wall of China and all these things. These are these households, or these these buildings that are pursued, and they have a huge cost of human capital. You see the level of suffering that goes into them. There's all of those things are true as well of the building of the church. There's tons of human suffering and suffering of Christians that goes into them. But again, I think it's different. Paul he says, to the Corinthians, like, you are, like, the city of God is a people. It's not primarily these buildings. And so I think that's the danger. We need buildings. They're good. The design of building, we should use our creativity to build buildings. But at the end of the day, the great commandment is to love God and love your neighbor. And so we want to steward our resources in such a way as to benefit as many people as possible, including, especially Christians. As Christians, we prioritize that above everything. So again, I'm not an anti what's it called? Architecturalist, anything. I think that there's a valid place for that, but I do think we want to try to maintain, a godly view and a godly sense of priorities in what we do and how.
Well, I don't want to lose this conversation. I mean, the Bitcoin stuff is super interesting, but this is actually really important, especially with the space. I think you should go back and listen to it. But specifically mentioning the Tower of Babel, like what that really implies is that when humanity is united around one purpose, like, what did God say about the Tower of Babel? Like, there's nothing
they can do. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So the Tower of Babel is essentially God saying, the desires, their intentions were misordered, and we have to stop this for now. It's not that time yet. Yeah. And the reverse of the Tower of Babel is essentially Pentecost, or the ordination of the church, when God comes down to man, unites mankind within the institution of the church, and then we go out onto the building project, the correct building project of the Tower of Babel, if you will. Now we are building something. We are building mankind towards the glory of God. So I think that's really what Christians need to articulate in this space. I actually believe that the church is called to this great building project of, quote unquote, mankind as the image of God, the Imago Dei. And that is the message that we need to articulate in this space. So I want to present an optimistic view of the future. I want to present something that says, yes, humanity is going to reach for the stars, and it's united, because it's going to require humanity to be united, and the only institution that can unite us is the church. So what we're doing is for the glory of God, and I think that's such an important message for us to communicate.
Yeah, I think, though, I agree with all that 100%. Again, and I think there's an unhelpful, pessimistic, quote unquote pessimistic. We have to define terms and all these things, but like a pessimistic view, I definitely see that. You have Christians who walk around and are like, oh, we're just waiting for the end times, all these things. I don't believe that way at all. I just think, like, when at the end of the day, Elon, at least if we just take his word, he's basically like, I want to preserve humanity, going into the future. I want to provide a safe place where humanity can live and flourish on Mars. So what we're going to do is I'm going to build for this. I'm going to build this contingency plan, and because I think this contingency plan is something that is necessary, I'm going to neglect all of the incredible ways that I could build here on Earth. I could build into inland Africa. We could build into I just think, again, your eschatology, to your point, I think your eschatology is borne out in how you live and how you invest your resources. And so I think it's clear that Elon is not a Christian, even though he might be sympathetic, but his eschatology is showing, is what I would say.
But I think he's even more sympathetic than you might realize. I'll let Matt, because he hasn't joined in yet.
I think I don't I don't think he's pessimistic. I don't think he's looking like for an out. Like, and again, not that we have to dwell on this topic forever, but I don't think he's looking for an out. Like,
topic.
I think it's fun. Hey, let's go. I'm in.
Humanity can't live on Earth, so we need to be on Mars. I think, he recognizes the need in the much further future. I don't know if it's, a population. I guess I don't know exactly, his thoughts on it. If it's a population thing that we need more space, or a resource thing, right? There are asteroids that have more, just in themselves have so much more, rare earth metals than the Earth does, right? And we need infrastructure to be able to do that. We need to be like an interplanetary civilization. I don't know. I think he's, I don't know. I don't know his thoughts. I personally think he's optimistic in what he does. And he presents it optimistically, at least, right? That, no, we are so great that we can also live on Mars. But I don't think anybody who's trying to go to Mars will think that living on Mars will be Mars is not more habitable than Earth, right? And I don't think anybody believes that. We can
terraform it.
I mean, to Jordan's point, though, you are burning money. I mean, I'm not endorsing Neil deGrasse Tyson at all, but I heard him talk on Joe Rogan show once that apparently getting a gallon of water to space is like $10,000. So those supply chains
found water on Mars, though.
But currently to get water to the space station where people are actually inhabiting, it's pretty expensive getting those resources there. So I kind of understand where Jordan's coming from, where it's like, what are we to gain here? Is this enabling human flourishing? And there's definitely a strong argument to say, there's a chance, probably not. But it's at the same time, it's so established. You don't want all that technology up there getting in the hands of the wrong people either. So it's like, how do you balance that? And that's the whole name of the game is balance.
To maybe bring it back to Bitcoin a little bit, Jordan, I want to know your thoughts. If say Bitcoin existed 100 years ago, right, and everybody was on it, we were on a Bitcoin standard, would we have had the space race? Would we have gone to the moon in the 60s? And, or, just now, if we were on the Bitcoin standard, would people still be aiming for Mars? Would it have to be a group of people who pool all their resources together? I don't know. I'm just curious. This doesn't seem like a purely fiat type of a thing. Again,
and this is it's funny because I'm one of the Christian Bitcoin guys. I wrote a book called Thank God for Bitcoin. I started a business called Thank God for Bitcoin, all these things. But I am under no illusion that Bitcoin's going to fix the world in those kind of ways, to those kind of degrees. Again, I think you're going to, if we had Bitcoin 100 years ago, I think we'd still get, we'd have fiat backed Bitcoin, your Bitcoin, just because, people don't want to, people were a lot more self-sufficient back then. So maybe you'd, if you didn't have to have the centralization of, maybe because Bitcoin doesn't lend itself to centralization to the same degree that gold does, maybe it would have taken longer, but I still think it would have happened. I think people like convenience and comfort and ease and generally, sadly, if the context is right, or the not settings, what's the word I'm looking for? The situation is right, people are always going to, pursue those things. And so again, I think that Bitcoin is a timely thing. I think I'm glad that it's here right now. But over a long time horizon, I still think, the human desire to go beyond what we have, and to create situations with contingency plans, even if they have all kind of negative externalities, is what people have done since the beginning. So I think it still would have happened. So,
and that's a good thing, but
no, I don't think it's a good thing. I think this is no. I think contingency planning for what God has done is actually the root of lots of bad things. Because and I'll go back. The quick version would be, you go back to the garden, and basically Satan, the serpent comes at him and Eve, and he's basically like, have you prepared for the contingency that God is not telling you the truth? Like, are you prepared for that? And so he basically says, you know, God's not telling you the truth. You need to prepare for a contingency in which God isn't true. And so he convinces them to trust his, you know, articulation of the way that the world works rather than God's. And it ends up going really poorly. And so I think that this is, again, if you're, and then you just look into Jesus. I mean, Jesus says, like, don't worry about tomorrow. Like, tomorrow will prepare for itself, will take care of itself. And our constant temptation is to worry about the future, is to worry about how are we going to feed our family. And then, you know, you could even look, I mean, this is a theme that's repeated all through the scriptures. But this is actually borne out in the Pharaoh after Joseph, you know, a couple hundred years after Joseph led Israel into Egypt. The justification for genocide on the people of Israel was that the Israelites had been so reproductive. God had so blessed them that they were so numerous that they could team up with one of Egypt's enemies and then basically take them out. And so that's the justification he used to oppress Israel and do all kinds of evil things. And so I think that this fear of the future that leads you to to sin and leads you to try to find safety outside of God's revealed will is pretty universally a bad thing, both in scripture and in human experience.
Well, I think, okay, so I do think that you're making a good point about we shouldn't be motivated by fears and pessimism. Mm-hmm. So if Elon is primarily motivated, and he has said this in the past, so you draw a good point there. If he's primarily motivated to do what he's doing out of fear that things are going to go wrong, I don't even think that's the best motivator for people. I think ultimately what really motivates people most is inspirational messages, is optimism, is this idea that, you know, we're gonna go out there and better our family and better our country, and you know, these kind of messages is really what ought to. And I think that Christianity and the church is ultimately what has that optimistic message. So I do think that's important. I'll give you that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, I thought this was interesting as you were talking about Bitcoin, to bring us back here.
There we go.
So you did say that you don't think, and this is a good point too, because I hadn't thought about it. Okay, the past 500 years of progress is primarily fueled by this concept of fiat money, and would this really be possible if we didn't have this type of system? Well, there's really two ways if you're going to build something that you can raise capital, right? You can go out and borrow money from banks, or you can sell equity. So if we didn't have this concept of just going out and inflating money with interest through banks by borrowing money, ultimately what would we have to do? We would have to sell our idea to a pool of investors. We would have to unify a bunch of people into an idea to go out and build something. And I mean, that's really even more powerful, this concept of unifying humanity around a message, around an idea. And that's what the church is all about.
And unifying,
drawing unity in mankind, male, female, employer, employee, all mankind is unified in the church. That's what the message of Christianity is that we can unify and accomplish, the glory of God.
And I 100% agree. And I think, again, the means, like the means of that unification matter as well. So God, the ends do not justify the means. Like this is a good principle. So this is why we're not communists. Okay. We can't just say the ends justify the means. And so what is God's means of getting people unified? One of them is by reason rather than just brute exercise of power. And so this is where, you see all throughout the scriptures, what is the difference between what differentiates humans from animals? We see in the New Testament, I believe it's in Romans 1, the Apostle Paul refers to wicked, mankind as, he says, like unreasoning animals, they act in such a way. And then all throughout the scriptures, all throughout the scriptures,
Romans 1 world.
Yep. And then all throughout the scriptures, you see God say things he's advocating that his people pursue reason. He says to Israel when they're in sin, he says, come, let us reason together. And so for people, whether it's on a governmental level or just individual level, like to reason is one of the most divine things you can do. And so this is another reason why I think fiat is so bad, is because it enables governments to rather than argue and make arguments with and present their case, to think out a well articulated and thought out case for a certain action. They just pursue that by deficit spending, or they just print the money to do it, or whatever it happens to be. And so reason is this. It's one of the most divine things. It's what differentiates us from animals. It's this gift that God has given us, and we should use that and play by God's rules in order to live in the world. And when, again, fiat money is one example of this, but there's all kinds. If you look at Pol Pot, you look at Stalin, they just suppress all dissent. They don't want to have arguments. They just want to exercise brute force so that, to put it in biblical parlance, their kingdom can come and their will can be done. And so, I think like reason itself is part of God's will being done. And as Christians, we go out there making, converting the world, not at the point of a sword, but we go out with the word. We go out with, the word of God. We go out with, a logical argument of who Jesus is and what he's done. And we proclaim that this is what happened. And we make these arguments, and we want to present these truths to the consciences and minds of people, and then have them respond. And so I think it's a tremendous thing that we're losing. We've lost, and that we need to regain.
And I also like the message of being pro, not just like the glory of the individual, but being pro glory of the unification of man.
Yes.
And so you are drawing these examples with Mao and all these people who are going out there and essentially bringing glory to themselves.
Yes.
And there's kind of a fundamentally different thing about the church and about Christianity, that we are glorifying really the unification of man, and that we're working together towards something greater. And I don't want to sound like a heretic here. Bitcoin is not a sacrament, but if you think of sacraments as fundamentally something that is unifying all Christians in the church, Bitcoin, in a sense, as a digital money, is built on this concept of unifying our efforts. You have all these individual nodes, all these individual people who are basically building the integrity of the system. So what makes Bitcoin so powerful is that everybody is basically on the layer, right? Everybody is on Bitcoin. So it is something of a unification, a global economy, if you will, that is bringing mankind together. And why that's powerful is because ultimately what we're doing through the church is we're trying to unify really all of mankind. And I think a money system that is built on that foundation concept of unity is something that we need to be pushing forward too.
Yeah, I think again, like the unification obviously is something like there's like when you think of Mao and you think of Stalin, like what are they actually pursuing? Hitler, like they're pursuing, it's not an individual unity, it's an ethnic unity. They're trying to create, they wanted to, Mao wanted to create a Chinese dominated world, and Stalin wanted to create a Russian dominated world, and Hitler, German. They zoomed out a little bit from the individual, but then they basically wanted it to still be a racially dominated world. And so to your point, the gospel is, we are all equal. The ground is equal at the foot of the cross. There's neither Greek nor Gentile. Like we are all one. And so I think that this is, I would never use the word sacrament whatsoever. I don't think that's, I think, but I just don't think that's helpful. But I do think that the broader point that you were teasing out is a good one. And so this is why I would think, and I think there's an argument to be made that gold is gold is a God-given gift, and it's this thing that was used as money all over the place, and it was this universal currency in a very real way. And so it's this thing that can be used as money that was the same. It's just pretty well distributed all throughout the world. And so there is a sense in which Bitcoin, a very real sense in which Bitcoin is something approaching that. There is still a difference. It's able to be used theoretically by everyone on Earth. Still to this point, only half the world, 4 out of the 8 billion people have access to the internet. and can actually, use and take hold of it and use it. So there is, in practice, at least today, there still is like a multiple tiered humanity. If you're thinking about Bitcoin, there's those who have, Bitcoin in electricity or whatever, and those who don't. But again, insofar as Bitcoin creates a world where that's closer to a world where again, at least theoretically, like all people are equal. No, there's no favorites within the Bitcoin world in terms of making the rules or changing the rules. So I agree. I think I agree with your broader point, even if not with the specific articulation of using certain words.
I'm with you. I am. I don't know. I hope this isn't too tangential, but to think about Bitcoin a bit. So you said, Bitcoin is equalizer. It's anyone's able to access it. But I will say one of the common debates in Bitcoin circles, really since 2017, when they forked Bitcoin Cash and then Bitcoin SV and all that, right, is that anybody can use it, but not everybody can use it, right? And so I don't know if have you taken a hard stance on, the ossification camp, I don't think anyone's still debating block size, but there's, any of these new soft forks, any of the, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because it especially whenever those fees spike, right, it becomes even less equitable.
Sure. Right? Sure. And so this is the comparison I make, and this is a whole longer conversation. But when I think about Bitcoin, both generally and then 4 years or 8 years ago versus now, or whatever you want to look at, like you have to have everyone has frameworks through which to see it. And so there's some people who mistakenly, when they think about Bitcoin, they think about it as like it's a stock, and they think about cryptocurrencies like they're stocks. So they think about Bitcoin, they're like, okay, Bitcoin is Apple. And then Ethereum is Tesla, and so they have this framework, and it's tempting. It's intuitive, but it's just wrong. It's a bad framework through which to see it. So the question is, what is a healthy framework through which to see money more broadly, including Bitcoin? And one of the frameworks that I would say is humans, like people. So that might sound insane. So the question is, how is that remotely the case? So when I think about Bitcoin in 2000, whatever it was, 9, when Bitcoin was first created, I think about Bitcoin as that's like Bitcoin in its embryonic form, or it's like an embryo. It's born. It's actually, especially pro-lifers, I'm imagining we're all Christians in this regard. So it's a human. Okay, it's a new life, but in terms of its ability to actually do much, like a baby in the womb is not able to be very useful in one sense out in the world. Okay, it still is an image bearer of God, so it's tremendously useful and valuable in that sense, but it's not able to be useful as something like an 18-year-old, as that child will be when he's 18 years old. It's far less useful. So when I think about Bitcoin, again, I think about Bitcoin, I think about it like that we're currently, Bitcoin's like, I don't know, maybe like an 8-year-old right now. Like it's a great store of value. You can use it to buy things, like it has a utility to it, but it's still nowhere near as useful as it's going to be into the future. And so this is where I think they're like layer 2s and stuff like that on Bitcoin are needed. They're going to be helpful. And I think the incentives to produce those things exist now, but will be even more demanded into the future as Bitcoin continues to be more widely adopted. I think the thing that the world lacks right now is not a medium of exchange. The thing that the world lacks right now is a store of value. And so so Bitcoin right now is being largely, it's by most people, 70% of the supply hasn't moved in years. And so I think that, again, the market, the vast amount of the market demand right now is for a store of value. They're looking for something, and they're saying, I need this thing that I can't find anywhere else. And so primarily, just the moment that we're at, that's the primary demand function for Bitcoin. I think that, again, like I said, I think that's going to continue to change over time. but again, that's just not where we're at. So I think that the Fork Wars debate was not a wrong debate to be had. It's just, it would be like those who wanted the medium of exchange right away would be like somebody objecting to the idea of a 3-year-old because he couldn't do what an 18-year-old can do. Like, you want a good thing, you just need to wait for you need to wait for enough time and maturity to happen in order to get there. So that's kind of how I would look at it.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. And I think, what I've just, heard from people in the space, right, that, I think you're right. If we would have had the block, if we hadn't discussed block size before and we were bringing it up now, people might be more amenable to it. But the fact that we have debated it, it's off the table now, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, could it happen? Like, could some group of forces convince a large amount of people that it would be a good thing to do? Yeah, could they do it again? Maybe. But again, I just think you're still going to have people who are looking at who see the store of value. They want something scarce. They want something that can be can run small enough, can run nodes easily enough to prevent a handful of dominant parties from exercising a huge amount of control over everybody else. I think there's value in that, and I think that's why things worked out the way that they did. And that's why, again, I think that it's not that the BSV folks or the Bitcoin Cash folks had like a completely wrong idea. That's not really the problem. And that's true more broadly of things in the world. It's not that these things that we want are horrible things. It's just that they're disordered or they're in the wrong time. It's the person. This is a weird place to go with this, but this is, sex outside of marriage. God has ordained sex to be within the bounds of marriage. Is that because sex is bad? It's like, no, it's actually because sex is very good and very powerful, and the consequences of sex produce all kinds of things that outside of marriage are actually not, they can produce a lot of problems in addition to all the good things they produce. And so there's a timeliness to everything within God's world. And so I think that, again, Bitcoin's maturity, I think it's really important that Bitcoin serves as a store of value, and then the more that we go on, I think that these other use cases are going to mature and come about.
When you talk about that, in the Catholic faith with theology of the body, we talk about, in that particular topic is when the proper order of being able to do that in the confines of a marital relationship is that when it can be free, faithful, total, and fruitful. That's what. And that basically speaks to everything you're talking about there. It's funny enough. Not to shift gears too much on you guys, but so my first exposure to Thank God for Bitcoin was one of my favorite political podcasts. Actually, the Steve Deace Show did a week by week chapter 2 years ago, and so I had never really heard much about it until then, and I still have yet to read the book. So I understand the concepts and everything that you were trying to portray, but I guess I know I'm probably new to the table, but if you could just kind of give a quick brush up on like where it started, because I've done the research where you guys started, but like where's it going? I guess that's kind of if we want to kind of go there, because I think that'd be a good thing to just touch on.
Yeah. So the short version of this is I would argue that throughout history, again, even going back at least 500 years. Okay, this is if we have Catholics here, this is potentially be a little bit controversial. But you go back 500 years.
It's just Matt and I. Don't worry about it.
Okay, got you. All right, so then I'll just offend as much as I possibly can. No, but so I think I think by anyone's estimation, there were issues in the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, 500 years ago. There were things that weren't great that were going on. Now, again, Luther himself didn't want to leave the church. He wanted to reform the church. So you get to this point where he sees these things going on, and he doesn't just say, all right, we're out of here, let's do these things. He tries to reason from the scriptures and basically say, hey, what's going on here is wrong and it's hypocritical. And so he's appealing to a people on the basis of a moral framework and groundwork that they already have in order to affect larger social change. And that proved to be tremendously fruitful. Now, again, there were people killed and all kinds of stuff, but this reasoning about, just trying to look at situations and reason, is this good? Is this consistent? Like, that's the process he went, and that was tremendously forceful. You look at something like, William Wilberforce. Do you guys know who William Wilberforce is? Mm-hmm. Okay. So he was a British politician, became a Christian when he was, I believe, maybe out of college age, somewhere around there, became a Christian and worked for most of his adult life to end the slave trade in England, which, again, they built their empire on the back of that, this whole thing. And the way that he was able to end slavery eventually was by basically effectively calling the British people hypocrites. He's saying, you are a Christian nation, and you're sitting here arguing and like building your empire off the fact that you're saying that these people are less human than these people, on the basis of their skin color. And then Martin Luther King Jr., for all of his faults, builds on this exact same thing. He basically says to, American Christians, this is hypocritical. And so the project of Thank God for Bitcoin, the book was this whole wild confluence of events. We were it was during the first few months of COVID, April or May, we started reading through a couple Christian books about economics. One was called The Honest Money by a Christian Reconstructionist named Gary North, and then a Roman Catholic scholar named Jörg Guido Holzmann wrote this book called The Ethics of Money Production. And so we read through those books and then just basically said, man, we love these arguments, but basically both of them, their arguments were basically, or like what you do with their arguments. So, how do we apply this now? Was we need to try to go back to the gold standard, which I'm very sympathetic to, but it didn't seem very likely to me. It didn't seem, just for a whole host of reasons that we could go into. But so then we're just like, hey, but Bitcoin seems like something that could be far more likely to succeed or to be pursued. I think this Bitcoin is, as strange as it sounds, Bitcoin is it's got all kinds of great reasons that I think it's gonna succeed. And so we end up writing our book for that reason. But even in the book itself, we only talk about Bitcoin in the last 2 chapters of the book. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the book and the vast majority of my desire as the primary person working at Thank God for Bitcoin, is to cast and unpack and just put out a robust Christian vision for what economics is and what money is, and demonstrate how your answers to those questions have all kinds of secondary and tertiary downstream effects for every single other part of your life, for almost every other part of your life. And so that's kind of the where it's come from and what our goal is. Our goal is to help Christians recover this tradition that we've had, to see the importance of the ethics of money production. It has all kinds of implications as far as, your vision of what humans are, why they exist, to what end they exist. All of those things have consequences on what you believe about in how nations and people pursue, on the type of money that nations and people pursue. And so, again, I think this is the big thing that we're doing. Bitcoin is great. Bitcoin, I think, is a good tool and a good gift. I think it's timely. If there was a giant solar flare and Bitcoin disappeared tomorrow, like, we would get back up and we'd wake up the next day and we would still continue talking about these things, because, again, they're timeless. These questions about ethics of money production are timeless. I think the author of The Ethics of Money Production is an Austrian economist, Roman Catholic named Jörg Guido Holzmann, and he expanded on the work of this 15th century Catholic bishop named Nicholas Oresme, who basically, again, tried to do exactly what I just described with Luther and Wilberforce and Martin Luther King, which was he looked at what this prince, I can't remember his name, but what this prince was doing. He was devaluing the money supply by increasingly putting more and more base metals into I believe it was silver or gold, one of them, into the money supply, and he was illicitly expanding the money supply which served to expand his own power. And so Oresme looked at that and said, Prince, you're breaking this very obscure, commandment from the Old Testament. It's called "Thou shalt not steal." It's called, you're stealing from your people. And so he saw very clearly the moral implications, and not just some obscure thing, but this is theft. This is a desire to not submit to the good limitations that God has designed the world to operate under. And so that's, I would say, in a nutshell, that's kind of what Thank God for Bitcoin exists to do, is do what Nicholas Oresme was doing 500 years ago in a modern context, and view Bitcoin as a one way to flesh it out. But again, I would say gold is submits to and is useful and licit in biblically speaking as well. So,
yeah, but the primary difference, and really what you call to, is just that we're not going back to a gold standard because we live in a digital world. We live in a global economy, 100%. And the money just has to, the money has to change and it has to evolve. And what I really think is so powerful about Thank God for Bitcoin is it's drawing a sense of institutional power, for lack of a better word, and maybe you could articulate this better, but a place for Christians to congregate in the Bitcoin space and to carve out a stake in the future economy that is Bitcoin, in the future world. And I think that's something that we talk a lot about on this podcast, just with technology in general. We talk to AI people, virtual reality, blockchain, Bitcoin. And the concept, really our thesis is that there is a future. The ultimate future is Christian. And the reality of technology is things are going to develop however fast or however slowly that ought to happen is another question. But things are going to develop and technologies are going to change. And so in this future world where these technologies become a reality of global everyday interactions, we need a Christian stake in that world. Ultimately, we want everything to be Christian. We want the whole world to be Christian. But at the very least, we should be carving out kind of a space there for Christians. And that's really what Thank God for Bitcoin is doing in what is otherwise just a broad free-for-all of other secular beliefs and things. And so I think that's huge. That's not minimal at all. And it's just going to continue to grow. Hopefully it encompasses the whole Bitcoin space. But for now, it's definitely doing good. Amen. And maybe you could also speak to, if we kind of dive something to a little of a more practical conversation before we close out, but what really should Christians be doing to kind of take full advantage? And when I say Christians, I don't just mean individual Christians, but the church as a whole. What should we be doing to really take full advantage of Bitcoin at the stage it is now, so that we're even more successful and more on chain, if you will, in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so to go back to the first point you made, which I agree with, I think again it's a difference in and not soteriology. What is anthropology? Like basically what we're describing, like what the stakes of this, it's a different view of anthropology. Like the difference between fiat money and a hard, scarce currency like Bitcoin or gold. It's a completely different anthropology. It's a completely different vision of what people are. So basically fiat currency, where governments and people, mankind can create value out of thin air. It views people as gods. Like it functionally treats people as though they're gods. They can just create value out of thin air and then subsidize any message or idea that they want to for, to whatever ends they want to. Whereas the Christian vision of what it means to be human is to be a steward. And so stewards, we're not out there choosing what to do. Like we receive a mission, and we receive, resources and gifts and abilities, and then we seek to be faithful stewards. We seek to apply those things that we have. God says to Moses, "What is that in your hand?" And Moses goes, "Okay, I have a staff." And so then Moses takes that staff, and God uses it in all kinds of amazing ways to lead His people Israel. And so I think that this is a similar thing. God creates this again. This works everywhere else out within humanity. God takes us with the limited, scarce abilities and talents and whatever else that we have, and He asks us to be faithful with them and use them. He doesn't ask us to become Superman. He asks us to just be faithful. And so Bitcoin is one way that we do this. As crazy as it sounds, Bitcoin, by just opting into a money that basically sees the world the way that God does, that embraces scarcity as a good thing and not something to be run away from. Bitcoin is it's a more sane way, as crazy as it sounds, to operate in the world. And so again, I think that one of the verses that I think about Bitcoin is the Apostle Paul in I believe it's 1 Corinthians. He tells the Corinthians, who are the most like the American church, they didn't struggle with poverty the way that some of these other churches did. They had all kinds of, sex was a huge thing. They had all kinds of things that were going on. And Paul basically says to them, there's not many among you who are strong. There's not many wise. And then not many super intelligent. He says, God used the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And basically God uses foolish things to bring to nothing the things that are in the world that is. And so I just think it's just so funny that right now, again, I would argue again, God is using this ridiculous thing, magic internet money, to shame and bring to nothing all these other national currencies. All these other currencies around the world are literally crumbling before our very eyes. Bitcoin is not doing it. They've made their own beds, but Bitcoin is this, again, not centrally planned. This idea that this guy had on the internet, and he just put it out there for anyone to voluntarily participate. Yeah, exactly. Guy with a made up name. Well, it could be a real name. We don't know. But,
allegedly.
But yeah, So God, this is what God does. God uses foolish things to shame the wise. And so again, I would say, what can Christians do? Again, I would opt in and buy Bitcoin, but not buying Bitcoin and interacting with Bitcoin and making the same mistake that people make throughout human history, which is to try to find salvation and safety from the world completely in some sort of created thing or thing that's the product of human intelligence or human making. We want to be stewards of things. So we want to, so Christians, faithful, we want to steward our resources well. So what that means is we take this money that is literally created out of thin air, and we take it and buy money that is not able to be done with. We also steward that, we hold Bitcoin and we steward that for the purposes that God has made us to use all money for and all resources for. So one of the conversations that I'm having semi-regularly is with Christian mission organizations and Christian educational institutions, and working with them to try to help, put together Bitcoin trusts, like Christian Education Bitcoin Trust, where you have organizations that are willing to receive Bitcoin donations or put a percentage of their treasury resources into Bitcoin and forget about it, in order to be able to fund the next generations of Christian missionary endeavors and Christian education and all these things. It's taking this thing that is this melting ice cube that's evaporating before all of our very eyes and investing in something that can't be done with. We're not looking at Bitcoin as if it's this thing that's completely impenetrable, we can't lose, and so we glory in Bitcoin. We don't do that. But Bitcoin is something that does abide by the world, by the laws that God made to govern the world. I could articulate that a variety of ways, but one of them being just the law of sowing and reaping. In the book of Galatians, the Apostle Paul says that God is not mocked, for what a man sows, that will he also reap. And so Bitcoin is sowing and reaping money. It's money that lives by this principle of sowing and reaping, abides by it, humbles itself underneath this design. And so I think that this is one way that Christians, it's a big way that Christians can leverage Bitcoin for the purposes that all wealth exists, to know and make known God, the God who is of all value, eternal value, to make him known to the thing that he values most in the world, and that's the people who bear his image. And so we want people everywhere to see the glory of God in the face of Jesus. And Bitcoin is one tool in the tool belt that can help make that possible in a world that is getting more and more insane with every day that goes by.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have multiple other questions, but for the sake of time, I feel like we should let people, simmer on this and digest this podcast, and maybe we can have Jordan back if he'd be so kind. But in the meantime, Jordan, I mean, our crowd probably knows about who you are, especially anybody that's into Bitcoin or crypto. But if for those who might not, you can just kind of give the people your pitch and tell them where to find you, and if they're more interested, where they can dive more into what you're putting out there.
And also about the upcoming conference, if you can just touch on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, guys, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for, providing a place to, foster these conversations. Like, again, it's no small thing what you're doing. And I know the work that goes into doing podcasts and, scheduling and all that kind of stuff. So thank you guys for what you're doing. As far as where you can find our stuff, you can find it at tgfb.com. You can find information about who we are and what we're doing. You can also find some of our podcasts where we're like our website, like the RSS feed doesn't always update immediately. And so we've got it's behind if you're trying to find podcasts on the website. But if you go to on Apple or Spotify, you can find all of our podcasts. I host the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast, where we just interview different Bitcoiners and even people who aren't Bitcoiners, but I feel like have something of value to add to the broader conversation. I also, insanely, if you thought Christian Bitcoin was niche, boy, you haven't seen nothing yet. I also host the Thank God for Noster podcast, which is just crazy, even more niche and weird, but also great. So I host that with a guy who's a Noster dev, and that's really good. I also have another podcast that I've only, I think, posted one episode of. I'm hoping to do more in the future. It's called the Economics of Glory. That's basically looking at the scriptures through an economic lens, and so you can find that. And then the last couple things I would say that working on 2 book projects right now. There's a kids book that we are just about finished with. It's going to be called The Orange Umbrella. And that should hopefully be out by the time the conference comes around. And then the other book that we're writing is called, it's a guy who's in Christian ministry in Canada. We're writing a book called The Gospel According to Bitcoin. So this is potentially super cringe, but it's not, I promise. Whereas Thank God for Bitcoin the goal was to explain Bitcoin to Christians. The Gospel According to Bitcoin is geared towards explaining Christianity to Bitcoiners. So ridiculously niche, but we think
that's common that needs to happen. I love that.
So that's in the works, and hopefully will also be done within the next couple months. So you can find out more at tgfb.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at jmbushwrites, WRITES.
All right, Jordan, appreciate you rolling the credits there, and I appreciate you having just taking the time to just filibuster with us and give us some good things to chew on and talk about, because this is going to be a great episode, I have a feeling. So appreciate it. Awesome. And everybody, thank you for listening to the podcast, and God bless. Thank you.